Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome your host, Kerrigan.
Thank you. Very, very much. Welcome to Witch Talk. My name is Kerrigan, and here we are again with another wonderful episode of Witch Talk. This time, we're going to go back to the 1600s and talk about witchcraft and how was witchcraft in those days. It will be a very interesting show, and I urge you to stay with us because this interview it promised to be one of the best. Now, before we go there, let me just tell you how you can contact us on Witch Talk. Here we go. So, you want to know how to keep in touch with everything Witch Talk? Go to www.witchtalkshow.com and follow all the latest news. Listen directly to the show and enjoy it. If you're on the move, take Witch Talk with you by subscribing to our Witch Talk podcast on iTunes or by following us on Podomatic Witch Talk site by going to witchtalk.podomatic.com. Don't forget to join us on Ustream Crowd. Go to www.ustream.tv/channel/witchtalk-show. Miss the show? Don't worry. Every show will be recorded and available for you to watch or listen both in Ustream and Podomatic. Witch Talk will air every Sunday at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time or approximately 9 p.m. in most Europe. Now, live in video, watch us on Ustream. Follow us on Twitter at Kerrigan, Kharagan, with an H after the K, or send us an email at witchtalkshow@gmail.com. Now, back to the show. And back to the show it is. Here we are again with a wonderful, wonderful guest today. But before we go there, we have to talk a little bit more about the websites. Now, let me show you and talk about this again. You can add us as a fan on Facebook if you want to. We have a fan page. You just type in Witch Talk and it will come up. And again, for you Facebook people, you can actually watch the show directly from Facebook, from our page right here. You can just click on Ustream Live, and there you are. I also want to talk to you about the Podomatic page for Witch Talk, and this is our podcast. So every single show that we do here will go live on Podomatic and become a podcast that is a radio internet show. So if you want to subscribe to us through iTunes, you can do that through this page, witchtalk.podomatic.com, or you can also click on our page on witchtalkshow.com and click on iTunes, and you're all set. So that's basically what I wanted to show you for today on clicking and links and all of that. So that's it. Let's go to Witch Reads, which I think that Indigo Australia has a lot to say today about a very new book. Here we go.
Witches talk about which books witches read. With Indigo Australia. Witch Reads.
About a very new book? What is that about?
I wasn't going to say anything, but yeah, it is new. It's very new.
I know. It's a very new book. No, I wanted to say yet another book, but it just came out like a very new book. I don't know why. Oh well. So
it is a new book.
Oh, it is a new book. Okay, so what is the book today?
The book today is a book It's a sequel. It's
Oh.
a pagan ritual prayer book by Kaisior Sereth.
Mm-hmm.
And we recently had him on the show, and he
Yeah.
was very generous to send us this book. It's published by Weiser.
Mm-hmm.
And I was really interested in it because I had kind of thumbed through his first book, which is a book of pagan prayer.
Mm-hmm.
And the difference between this is focused on the ritual aspect of prayers.
Yeah.
And it's pretty good. You know, it's very broad. It doesn't focus on only one path. You know, I know when we had him on the show, he was discussing his many interests in various traditions. He's a part of ADF, so he's a druid,
Yeah.
a neo-druid. He has a background in paganism and neo-Wicca, and he also is interested in Mithraism and the Proto-Indo-Europeans. So, you know, he takes all of that experience and he brings that to the subject with ritual prayers. And not only that, but he also, you know, goes on the whole broad spectrum. So he includes prayers from, you know, the Rig Veda and from other, you know, Japanese texts. There's a lot of Greek and Roman deities that are called, and it's really interesting. It's a good book. I can see it being of more use for a solitary practitioner
Yes.
or someone that is less traditional, definitely. But it's a very good book. I would use it to just kind of draw my own inspiration or to just kind of, you know, it's good as a starting point for me. You know, it's not something I would just go directly from the book because that's just not my personality.
Well, Kaisior actually wrote all of those, right? Some of those, yeah.
Well, he talks about in the beginning of the book how he takes the, you know, the ritual that are in the sources. He takes the ritual and he kind of condenses it down into a prayer. So, you know, he discusses his method in the beginning introduction chapters.
So this is a very, very, you know, when we talk about it's a very new book, it is new, but it's also small, isn't it small? It's a little book, and it's not really,
I'm trying to, you know, estimate how many inches it is, which is probably only of use for American listeners. It's probably about, you know, 6 inches tall by 4 inches wide, I'd say. So it's very small, but you know, that's good if you're going to an outdoor ritual or you're preparing an outdoor ritual. You don't want a huge book to carry with you. You know, something small enough you can fit into, you know, if you have a large pocket on a robe, this could easily fit into that.
I know, it's wonderful.
And I know you kind of have a problem with the texture of the cover, but I realize
I do.
that this is waterproof. So if you're going outside and it's starting to rain, it's not going to ruin the cover.
That was a very good thought of you.
You know?
Let me just show you the book. The book is small. It's this small. It's not really a big book. But, yeah, well, no, I do have a problem with the cover. Not because it's waterproof, but because it reminds me, you know, the what is it called?
It's a Catholic hymnal kind of, you know, the prayer book that
the prayer book that the Catholics use. So it's kind of like the same shape. It's the same kind of texture. So the texture of the cover, it's the same. You know, I don't have anything against you know, Christians. They do have against us, but that's another discussion.
Well, that's a different discussion altogether because Christians are a much more broad scope than Catholics. I came from a Christian background, but I never had a prayer book to use. So I don't really. I think that's pretty cool, actually, that it's waterproofed. You know?
Let's just stick to the waterproof thing. So it's very, very good because it's waterproofed. I like the simplicity of it. I really do, and it's very, very beautiful. It's a very nice book and a wonderful. It's a rich resource, I think. You know, for inspiration, as you said, and for me, even if you want to do something and you can't really get your head around it, so you just grab the book and just see what it has, because it's divided by, you know, types of rituals, so consecrations and blessings, you know, all of that stuff, and it's very, very good. I just really like this book. So how many cauldrons do we have here?
I'm going to give it 3.5 cauldrons.
Okay.
It's good, but there are some things that I would like to see changed.
And that's what?
For example, there's a lot of beautiful prayers that he's written here, but, from the beginning of the book, he said that he's used, source materials, and he even includes the source materials in the back, but he doesn't specify which prayers were used from which source material. So I would have liked some kind of a footnote to, like a numbered footnote to just point in the back which source was used for that specific prayer, because I'm something of a traditionalist, and when it comes to my rituals, I like to have this new format, but also I'd like to take a look at the original rituals to see what is also included in that ceremony. What specific incense is supposed to be used, what kind of other things that are going on around in the ritual, what times of day, etc., that should be used if I'm going to be using a ritual from that book. And I don't have to specifically use the ritual that is written in the source material. I can always, substitute with the prayer that he's written in the book or of my own construction.
Yeah.
But I would have liked to have something that points to the, original.
Yeah. Sorry, the text or source.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. And also, there's a appendix in the back of the book that is a glossary of the deities used, which I think is fantastic because it shows exactly how broad the spectrum is in this book. But also, I kind of would have liked to have a cross-reference. So if it says that, breed was used and it explains who breed is, there's also some kind of a page number to which prayers have been said in honor of breed or calling to breed throughout the book. It would be really nice, especially for someone who has a relationship with a deity already, to use those prayers that have already been, written for that specific deity. Because I'm one of those people that I'm not going to ask something from someone that I don't know.
Yeah.
And especially, if you have a relationship with someone, that would be, so much nicer if you ask from someone that you actually have worked with in the past.
Yeah.
You might get better results.
That will help. No, go ahead.
There's also, I find it very interesting, he included a ritual for the American Independence Day.
Oh, yeah. That's very interesting, yes.
It is. So, I can only see Americans getting some kind of use out of that.
Yeah.
And I gotta be honest, I've never done a ritual for American Independence Day before.
I know, but why would you do that?
I have no idea.
You know what I mean? Well, first of all, no, it's fine. I mean, you can celebrate. It's a celebration. It's not really...
Oh, yeah. I mean, people shoot off fireworks. Yeah. It's a big deal in America.
Yeah, it's a celebration. So I would imagine that it's a ritual of celebration, we would hope, but still very, very focused on America. So, well,
here's one of the prayers that he says: "The fireworks are roses in the bouquet we are giving to you, Liberty. Hear our love and their explosions. The sounds of delight in the watching crowds are your hymns, our rededication to you, the offering."
So it's liberty is what it is. I mean, liberty is a goddess, is addressing liberty as a goddess, right?
The expression, I assume so. Yeah, the expression of liberty and rededicating yourself to liberty. So it's something of a rededication ceremony, I assume. In the back, it also includes, I'm
not sure. Is liberty a goddess? I don't know. Maybe I'm just saying, oh, maybe not. Maybe not. I never heard about it, but, Fortuna, which is fortune, is
definitely a goddess.
Is a goddess. But, I don't know if liberty is a goddess. I don't know.
Well, in the back, if he used liberty as a goddess, I'm sure he would have included it in the glossary of deities in the back, and there is no liberty in the back. So I think it's liberty as an expression, as a concept, as rededicating yourself to the freedom and pursuit of happiness that America is.
Okay, so that's very nice. Although I don't really believe that the English would do it, but anyway.
I don't think so. I don't think anyone that isn't actually American
would do it. Or the Portuguese or anybody else.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's good.
So it's uniquely American.
Yes.
You can tell it's definitely, focused on the American side. But, there's a lot of other rituals that are not focused on... I mean, there's only 2 prayers for the American Independence Day. Yeah. And there's a very wide variety of, specific uses that you would be using a ritual prayer, times of day, the cycles of the year, beginnings, home purifications, birth, death, different cycles, petitioning the gods, prosperity, healing, travel, society, and the land. I mean, there's a huge broad spectrum, not only of deities and traditions and cultures, but also specific uses. I mean, he's got everything covered.
Now, one of the things that I like on this book is the index of offerings. It's Appendix A, and it's an index of offerings to various deities. So, and it's by the name of the deity. So, for instance, if you are going to make an offering to an earth deity, so bread, pigs, and beer will be, what would be advised by him.
Now, I don't know if that's going to work for everyone, because I know that there are some deities that prefer, some things, and then other deities don't. So, for example, I know when I was reading...
general, kind of.
Yeah, I know, for example, when I was reading in From a Drop of Water, which I reviewed last week, there is, I have to try to remember the name of the deity, and I forget. There is a specific deity in the voodoo tradition that prefers offerings of fish, and that's associated with water. But if you were to give fish to Yamanya, she's the mother of fishes, so that would be offering her, slaughtered children back to her. Exactly. So I don't, I don't know if that's going to be useful for, it's a little bit too general for me personally. I would suggest that with everything, if you're going to be making an offering to a deity, research that deity before you do anything, because you don't want to inadvertently piss somebody off.
No, and
which is an American term for the Brits. That's an American term to be upset.
Well, they know. Believe me, they know what you mean. Now, one of the things that I think that it's very interesting about all of these books, we should always take it with a grain of salt. So you should always think by yourself, think logically, and not following blindly everything that it's written in books, because sometimes authors are wrong. And we had some examples of that.
Human.
Yeah, but we're talking about authors, so yeah, it's just sometimes they are wrong or not really specific, and sometimes it's better to rely, for instance, in ancient texts or other sources that are coming from experience, from the past. So it's kind of like a very good, nice thing to do a little research by yourself. So 3 and a half cauldrons,
which means it's good. It's bordering on very good, but there's just some things that I would have liked to have just
sorted out.
Just sorted out. It's not even that big of a sorting out. It's just little things here and there that I would just like to have adjusted.
I absolutely agree. I think it's a wonderful little book. What did I say? A brand new book? No, a brand new book.
It's a very new book.
A very new book. It's a very new book, but still, I think that it has fantastic things, but other things are not. Well, that's why you gave it 3.5 cauldrons anyway. But
yes.
Yeah. So thank you so much, Indigo, for this wonderful review, and you will be here next week.
I will be, and I know what I'm reviewing next week. It's very fun, very interesting. Yes, I do.
Okay.
It's a very new tarot deck.
Oh.
Or oracle card, sorry. A very new oracle deck.
Oh, good. Oh, that's great. That's great. I love that. Okay, so thank you very, very much, and I will see you again next week, right? With more books. Well, not books, but it's a tarot deck, which is a different thing, but it's not, nonetheless is a review. So thank you.
I'll be back next week.
Okay. Thank you so much. You're staying in the chat room, right?
Yes, I will be.
Okay. Good. Okay. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye. And that was Indigo Estrella with a review of a pagan ritual prayer book. Cassior Serith is the author of the book, and it's a very tiny little book of prayers, and it's very interesting. It's a very interesting book. I think that it will inspire you to either search more or to use in your own ritual. So it's a very nice book. 3.5 cauldrons. So we will hope that we will. I mean, it's a good book, and it's a very good source of inspiration. Now, let's go to our introducing our guest today, and we'll take it from there. So it's a very, very interesting guest. Let's see what we have to say about her. Here we go. The Pendle witchcraft case is a compelling human story which provides a dramatic insight into the importance of magic in the lives of our ancestors. This book offers a detailed account of the extraordinary events that took place in Lancashire in 1612, particularly those surrounding James and Alizon Device, the teenage brother and sister at the center of the case. It draws on a wealth of sources, including books of magic and trial records, to evoke a world of magicians and cunning folk, of charms, divination, and familiar spirits. Taking a thought-provoking new approach to the history of witchcraft, it conjures a vivid picture of what it was like to be someone who practiced magic during the witch hunts. Joyce Froome is a writer and a researcher specializing in the history of witchcraft and magic, and works as an assistant curator at the Museum of Witchcraft in Boscastle, Cornwall. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome my guest today on Witch Talk, Joyce Froome. Hello, Joyce. How are you? Welcome to Witch Talk. Joyce?
Thank you very much for inviting me on the show.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you for accepting the invitation. Now, this is I have all week heard from people that they're very exciting for this show, because it's something that it's not really usual, is it, to talk about the 1600s and witch trials and how magic was practiced in those days, and it's a very, very interesting subject that you made a wonderful book out of it. But when did you're welcome. When did it begin, this interest that you have on history and particularly of witchcraft history?
Well, I've always been interested in history, and I've also always, from quite a young age, I loved novels about witches and witchcraft. Mm-hmm. And when I was a kid, I was, always reading these stories about witches and witches' cats and, bed knobs and broomsticks and all those sorts of stories. Mm-hmm. Then when I went to university, and although I did English at university, there was a lot of emphasis on the sort of cultural history side, how literature reflected the culture of the time generally. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And then when I moved to Cornwall, I found myself working at the Museum of Witchcraft in Boscastle. Mm-hmm. And that really did make me aware of how rich a heritage of magic we have, and how, in many respects, it's been written out of conventional history. Yes. Studying kind of cultural history and the history of science, you're always aware of this sort of alchemy and herbalism and that side of things. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. But to a certain extent, the fact that these are actually also quite magical subjects, mm-hmm. Alchemy very much ties in with magic, mm-hmm. and herbalism in practice was often accompanied by magical charm. Mm-hmm. conventional histories tend to sort of brush that under the carpet.
Yes.
And that's a real shame, because magic is part of our culture, and it tells us a lot about people's spiritual beliefs in the past. And that, again, is another, I think, very important issue, that we understand the conflicts between Protestantism and Catholicism, and how much that influenced our history. But we're not so aware of the fact that actually there were a lot of people whose religious views were unconventional, a lot of people who were very individualistic about their religious beliefs. And magic was one of these important spiritual threads, which, again, I think it's a real shame that that hasn't been fully appreciated, that these people who practiced magic in the past were people who felt very passionately that magic was a spiritual belief system, and they were prepared to risk their lives to practice magic during the witch hunts, and they don't get the recognition that they deserve, I think.
No, that's true. That's absolutely true. Now, and people sometimes forget that England, it's so connected with, I mean, as you said, so connected with magic. Now, when did you begin to be, involved with the Museum of Witchcraft? What brought you there?
Well, that was... although I used to live in a suburb of London, but we always had our holidays in Cornwall, on the north coast of Cornwall, which is very beautiful, very wild scenery, as you may know. And it was one of these situations where we used to come down on holiday, and it got harder and harder to go back. And so in the end, we didn't go back. We just stayed living in Cornwall. But it's also quite a sort of economically deprived area, not a lot of jobs around, really. But one of my neighbours, Vivian Shunley, who in fact did some of the illustrations for my book, a very talented artist, she had some of her pictures on sale in a gallery in Boscastle. And anyway, I was moaning to her one day about how difficult it was to find a job, and she said, I believe Graham, who runs the Museum of Witchcraft, is looking for someone to work there. And, and I literally said, where is your telephone? And I rang him that very minute.
Yes.
And as it happened, at that stage, all the people who were involved in the museum were very much people who were involved in modern magical practices of one kind or another. And so he didn't have anyone who had studied the history of magic. And so I kind of just fitted in, filled the gap in the staff that he had. So it was just one of these. I think it was meant, really.
To be, yes. I think so too. Now, do you consider yourself a pagan or a follower of the old religion, or you're just an historian? Oh, okay. Because some people are just, interested in the historical, part of it, and it's very analytic, and they don't really, have any kind of, what would you say, path or religion or any spirituality, but they do have this special, kind of set on history that they just developed, a speciality on, and they dedicated themselves to it, but they don't really are involved in it, which is not your case, then.
No. I mean, I think I was drawn. I was drawn to history because I've just interested in the past and how people lived in the past, and because it's interesting to see how people had different priorities and to see how people lived very differently from us. Yeah. It's very easy to get very complacent about thinking how, the way of life we live now is the only way to do things.
Yes.
But on the other hand, my fascination with magic was always very much a kind of gut thing, a kind of emotional. I was drawn to magic on an emotional and a spiritual level, and certainly I think the more you study magic, really, it's hard to imagine not at least trying things out in the spirit of experiment, you know.
Yeah.
And then, of course, it is quite surprising how it works. And then well, I was kind of quite surprised to find that it worked, really. And then also, as I say, I just developed such an admiration for people who practice magic that I've become really more and more drawn to essentially what is really quite the simple spiritual basis for magic, which is that there is a divine creative force in everything. And it sort of pervades and connects everything.
Yes.
And magic is just a way of accessing that force. And magic isn't the only way. It's, you know, it's what you feel when you watch a beautiful sunset or when you listen to a good piece of music. It's something, it's just that sense of awe, really, at the wonderfulness of, you know, this extraordinary world that we inhabit.
Yes.
And I think that is paganism, really, isn't it? That sense that everything, from, you know, a stone, you know, through all the animals and the plants, and then the amazing stars and galaxies, that there is something that connects it all, and that we are all connected to it.
Yes. Yeah. No, it's a very interesting, you know, concept and way of you know, the connectivity between every single thing, including stones. It's very, I believe pagan, very pagan. Now, one of the most amazing books, it's this fantastic Wiccan enchantments that you released, A History of the Pendle Witches and Their Magic, which is a fascinating book. You released this in, I think, what was it, 2010?
Yes,
Yes.
just about a year ago.
Yeah, and it's not a small book. I mean, it's a book. It's what I would call, you know, if you have the book on your hands, you know that it's a book. So it's
meant to be that long.
Yes, it's very, very good. Now, go ahead.
It was one of these projects that just grew. In fact, when I first thought about doing it, I thought, am I going to have enough material for a whole book? And I thought, you know, maybe it would end up a little fact sheet that we just pin up in the museum somewhere.
Yeah.
And I was actually really very surprised to find out how much material there was out there. And of course, the internet is really useful in tracking down, you know, an awful lot of original documents from the early modern period are now available. You know, they've been republished, and you can find them now on the internet. A lot of them are actually on websites, and you can read them, you know, on the internet. But also, of course, there are lots of these internet book shops, so that you can track down and find really obscure books. And so I think it would have been much more difficult to write a book of that kind even just a few years ago. There is just so much more material available now.
Yeah, that's true. Now, tell us a little bit more about this. Let me just show people, because I have a video. I told you this before we started the show. So maybe we just see the video and then we talk about what the Pendle Witches are, and how did you took this, and formed this fantastic book that you wrote. Is that okay?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so let me just show everybody this fantastic video that I think that it's very good and very you know, clear. It's clear on the history of the Pendle Witches. Here we go.
Old Pendle, thou standest alone, twixt Burnley and Clitheroe, Whalley and Cole, where Hodder and Ribble's fair waters do meet, with Barley and Downer on Thames and Dyke.
It's 1612. This is Pendle in the county of Lancashire. I'm a young local woman of few material means, and I'm a Catholic, and for that I'm just about to be hunted down and executed.
Shall reign to the end of all time. In beauty eternal, thy banner unfurl.
In this turbulent time, King James I was at the throne and had just published his works Demonology, a guide for hunting down those suspected of practicing magic. The lines between religion and witchcraft were blurred, and superstition was rife. Lancashire in England's northwest had long been held up as a Catholic stronghold and was thought to be a dangerous and lawless land. And if you were a local magistrate intent on serving your king, then this was the perfect place to bag yourself a witch. The villages of Pendle in the northeast of the county are dominated now, as they were then, by Pendle Hill, which kind of shadows everything around it. I actually grew up in a village in this area, and even on the sunniest of days, it has an almost dark and brooding presence. Imagine then when Pendle Hill was covered in forest. The villages at its feet were wild and inaccessible, and dwellings often remote and lonely places to live. Two rival families, led by the matriarchal figures of Demdike and Chattox, strike fear into local people who believe them to have special powers. They are said to use herbs and potions to cure ills or throw curses. Today we may have just seen them as healers or herbalists, widowed women trying to make their way in life. Yes, some of them might have been mischievous, intent on making others suffer some of their hardships. Or were they, quite simply, as a lot of people think, just devoutly following their religious beliefs? Ultimately, though, as we know, they came to a tragic end as they were sought out and sent for trial at Lancaster Castle in August of 1612.
So this was a little bit of the video. I'm not going to show the video all the way because I think that it's too much. But still, I mean, we know a little bit more of the history of the Pendle witches now. We know that this was during the reign of James I. And we do know that he just, when this occurred, this event occurred, this trial of the Pendle witches, he just recently had published his demonology book. So here is the framework, the historical framework. Would you like to add something, some more things to this framework?
Well, I think it's particularly interesting that, in fact, James I, before he wrote Demonology, he was involved in the North Berwick witch hunt, which was one of the most important Scottish ones. And that also involved cunning folk. That is, we know that the people who were prosecuted were actually people who practiced magic, because there's one of the pamphlets about the case actually says that the first person to be arrested was this woman, Gaylis Duncan, and she was a healer who used magic to heal people. And she was arrested just purely because she was a healer. And in Scotland, the witch hunts were much worse in Scotland than they were in England. And she was then tortured, and she then implicated other people. Another wise woman called Agnes Sampson, and a school teacher called John Fian, who apparently predicted, in his trial record it said that he predicted that someone would die. So he was either some kind of clairvoyant, or he was perhaps an astrologer. And then they eventually confessed that they had been involved in a plot to wreck a ship that King James was sailing back from Denmark on. And so that became this terrifically scandalous case that they had tried to possibly kill the king. And King James I became involved in that case, obviously, since he was supposed to be the victim. But this was all purely because these people had been tortured. And so there was really no substance to this idea that they had ever really plotted against the king. But this obviously predisposed King James I to be hostile towards people who practiced magic. And so in his book Demonology, he not only condemns the kind of things that we think of as conventional witchcraft, flying to the Sabbath and sacrificing babies and that, but he specifically condemns cunning folk for performing healing magic. He says that even though it might seem to cure people, it actually destroys their souls, because of this idea that magic was sort of fundamentally evil, and even people who performed healing magic were actually, they were only really doing that to deceive people.
Yes.
And in reality, they were in league with evil spirits.
Yes.
Because this was really the fundamental division that was really behind the witch hunts. That you have the people who actually practiced magic, who saw it as really something essentially very natural, and as I said earlier, about drawing on a natural energy that connected everything.
Mm-hmm.
But then you had not only the religious authorities, but also the state authorities, who said that magic was fundamentally evil because it was actually could only be done with the help of evil spirits.
Mm-hmm.
And this is where we get the whole idea of magic involving worshipping the devil from, which is still something, working at the museum, it's surprising how many people I encounter who, come in and say, oh, magic, isn't that all about devil worship? And yet this is essentially the propaganda of the witch hunters.
Yeah.
And I think behind that lay the fact that magic was actually very liberating and empowering. And we're talking about a society that was really a terrible authoritarian dictatorship right across Europe.
Mm-hmm.
Very much a sort of pyramid, and of course very much a society where men had power and women did not.
Yes.
And magic was something that gave ordinary people power, and it gave the poor power over the rich, and it gave women power over men. It was something that any ordinary person could draw on, and this was really quite a threat to social order as the people in control thought of it. And so that was really the political situation. And, King James I in his book was quite adamant that all magic was evil, even magic that was used for healing the
Mm-hmm.
sick.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so, the Pendle witches, what is really interesting is that the case itself was quite controversial, and it was obviously a huge miscarriage of justice. And so the trial judge asked one of the court officials, Thomas Potts,
Mm-hmm.
to write a pamphlet about the case, which was essentially putting the official point of view. So it's a work of unscrupulous propaganda, but it is also gives us an enormous amount of information about the case, because it includes most of the statements that were actually used in the trials, and also some statements that the Justice of the Peace, who actually prosecuted, he was like the sort of prosecuting attorney, also some statements that he drew up from the suspects, even though they weren't actually used in the trial.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so it is a very well documented case. And what is really fascinating is the references to magic that it contains, which give us these little glimpses of the magic that these people were practicing, and also does make it quite clear that the two families at the centre of the case, the Southern's Device family and the Whittle Redfern family, were cunning folk. They were people who were employed by their community to perform healing and protection magic.
Now, this is one of the most documented witch trials in history. It's very well documented, one of the best documented, and I'm sure that you got. I mean, the good thing about this book is that one of the good things about this book, because it has many good things, is that you begin the book by telling the story of Alizon the witch. It's in chapter 1, and then you just go, and then you go to you talk about the pins and what we're going to talk about what happened, but you talk about the pins that she was getting from this man, and then you talk about the magic of the pins. So you it's almost like a film, that you just interrupt. Let's pause here and talk about this particular way of magic, and here's what we found out about pins and about the magic of pins and what you can do with pins. So this is absolutely amazing. It's a very I find it very surprising way of writing a book, because you begin with the story of behind the trial, and then the trial itself, and then you just pause in some places to actually introduce pieces of magic that relates to it. What was this really? How did you find? Did you put this together? It was intentional, obviously, but did you thought about it, or how did you put it?
I was essentially again. It was almost a kind of happened by accident.
Yes.
We get a lot of inquiries, requests for information at the museum,
yes.
and we had one about. It was actually from the Pitt Rivers Museum in Oxford. And they've got a thing called a witch's ladder, which is feathers knotted into string. And they contacted us, and they actually asked us to look through our library at witch trial records to see whether we could find any reference to such a thing. And actually, up until that point, I hadn't really studied witch trial records in any great depth, for the simple reason that I thought it would be too horrible. But we had been... we'd given some help to the Lancashire Witch Project, which was a touring exhibition about the Lancashire, the Pendle witchcraft case a few years ago. And so I knew about the pamphlet, and I knew that it was one of the most detailed cases. So I thought, well, I'll start off with this pamphlet. And I started to read it, and I was just absolutely riveted. I mean, it was horrible, absolutely horrible, but also really fascinating. And I was just struck by these references to magic, and by how closely they were related to the kind of magic that we have in the museum, which really, and I was just astounded, not only because I had really not expected to find references to things like healing magic in a trial pamphlet. It seemed extraordinary to me that, a healing charm that somebody said, this is what we use to cure the sick, would actually be used in evidence against that person in a witch trial. But also I was just amazed to think, well, there are references to human teeth, and we've got a human tooth in the museum that was used for healing magic, and so I was just so astonished. I thought, well, this is an aspect of the witch hunts that I felt hadn't been really dealt with in a great deal of detail. Other books do touch on it, but it was simply because I felt that having access to the museum collection, I was in this unique position, and to illustrate the book with photographs, so that I thought, good heavens, I can write a book about a really important 17th-century witchcraft case, and I can illustrate it with photographs of objects that exist now, and this makes this connection, which is what I really wanted to do. I wanted to make people realise that these people were not so very different from us, that there actually is a connection, that you can trace the history of magic back from what people do today, right back to the time of the witch hunts.
Yeah. Now, it's very interesting because you do have a lot of... Well, let's talk about the story of this trial. There are two central individuals on this trial, and you begin the story like that. It's Alizon Device, right? And then there is a man that she buys the pins from. And so this girl, she was a teenager, right? She was...
Yes, probably only about 17 years old. Which again is quite, you think of people during the witch hunts as being, primarily elderly people being picked on. But in fact, yes, I mean, she and her brother, James, who was probably about 19, slightly older than her, are really the central figures, because they were the people who were actually accused. It was when you actually look at the pamphlet, although being propaganda, it tries to create this impression that everybody in Pendle was really frightened of these people. There are actually only 3 people who actually stepped forward and accused them, and that is the peddler who refused to sell Alison the pins, and basically they had this argument. Alison, being a teenager, got very stroppy, got into a real teenage tantrum, and so they had this violent argument, and he was quite frightened of her because he knew that she came from this family that had this magical power. And so as he hurried away, he suddenly collapsed, and maybe he just tripped in a pothole. He was a peddler, he was wearing a heavy pack, so he could have injured himself quite badly just tripping and falling, or he might have had a stroke perhaps, although he was able then to get up again and walk to a nearby inn. But he became quite ill, and he became convinced that Alison had bewitched him. So he sent for his son, and the son, because his father was ill, it was the son who went to the local Justice of the Peace, Roger Noel, and accused Alison. So basically it was the peddler and his son were 2 of the people, and then the other person was a local landowner, Henry Townley. And actually he, a year earlier, had accused Alison's brother, James. Henry Townley's wife had died very unexpectedly. She was quite young, and she had died after having, in fact, a very similar quarrel with Alison's brother, James. She had accused James and his mother of stealing some turf. And it's very likely that they actually worked for the Townley family, that they sort of did casual work. This was quite common in that period, that the sort of wealthier families would employ the less wealthy families to do casual work for them, and they kind of like give them presents. It was all very informal, and they sort of give them gifts of farm produce and stuff in return. And it seems likely that James had taken these turfs sort of in payment for work that he'd done, and he probably had sort of, taken rather more than he was entitled to. And anyway, so he had this row with Anne Townley, and then she collapsed and died a few days later, and Henry Townley was then convinced that James had bewitched her. So that, in fact, there were only these 3 people, and only these 2 actual incidents. James Device suspected of killing Anne Townley, and Alison Device suspected of bewitching this peddler, John Law. And these were the 2 accusations that actually triggered this really major witch hunt, which eventually claimed the lives of 11 people.
That's amazing. Now, there is a question from the Witch Talk chat room. One of them is about the Hand of Glory, which is something that it's kind of like, everybody knows what it is. Some people say that it existed actually. Some people don't say that it existed at all. Do you have any account of this being used at all back then?
There's an 18th century account of some thieves making a Hand of Glory, the idea being that they could burgle a house and everybody would be plunged into this deep sleep. But unfortunately it didn't work, and so they got caught, which is how we know that they had made a Hand of Glory, because they were caught with it in their possession.
They didn't quite do it very well, did they?
they must have not quite got the right spell.
No.
But it's described in an 18th century book of magic, which is known as Petit Albert. It's a French. It's something like the Secret Merveilleux du Petit Albert. Which was quite an influential book of magic, and it also has, the same book has a treasure hunting candle, which is a candle supposedly made from human tallow in a forked hazel stick, and we actually have one of those in the museum.
Yes.
And we're not quite sure where it came. It actually came from a country house in Gloucester. It was collected by an eccentric collector called Charles Wade, but we don't know where he got it from. But it's made to the description in this 18th century book of magic, Petit Albert. So that seems to have been quite an influential book of magic, I think.
I think so. Yeah, yeah. Now, there is another question here. Let me see. Red Book of a pen. Do you ever? This is another question. Did you ever come across with any mentioning of the Red Book of Apin, or Apin, the Book of Apin or Apin? No, you never.
No.
Well, I don't know. Well, yeah, but sometimes people, that's it. So, now again, we begin the book about the pins, and we begin the book about talking about the pins, and Alizon asking the peddler, for the pins, and he refuses it, and then you go into details about. There he is. I just wanted to show people the candle that we just saw, that you just talked about on the book. This is the book, and this is the candle, that Joyce was talking about. It's absolutely amazing. And this is in the Museum of Witchcraft in Cornwall, right? Right there. If the candle is lit in an underground place, it makes a great deal of noise, crackling and sparkling. It is a sign that there is a treasure in that place. So it's absolutely amazing. So if you want a candle like this, you have to really follow the recipe from the Patil Bear. So what is it about the pins? Because pins is something that really, it's almost cross-cultural, isn't it? I mean, if you begin on if you remember, in Greek, in the Greek culture, you have all of those pins sticked into little clay dolls that they made, and then you go to Egypt, and then you get the same, and then you get to all of the African countries and all of the of the African cultures, and then you have that also, and then you come to America and you have it in voodoo and all sorts of things, and people think that pins are only characteristic to voodoo, which is absolutely not what it is at all. And we have this particular example in this book that you wrote about the pins. Now, the pins. Tell us a little bit more about the pins and their usages, the use of the pins, because they were not only, and this is a misconception that people sometimes do, they were not only used for cursing; they were used for healing also, and protection.
Yes. Yes, for all manner of things, and actually, the whole idea of the image and the pins, and sticking pins in an image, was used just as often for love magic as it was for trying to harm people, and I think quite a lot of the early examples too. Certainly, some of the Roman ones are for love magic. Essentially, it's to do with getting power over a person, and it's this idea, not so much, or at least, yes, obviously, I guess a pin is a sharp thing. It's a sort of weapon, but also it's a way of directing magical power. And in that respect, I suppose it's not unlike the magical knife, which of course is not used so much for cutting as for channeling magical power. And so a pin, in a way, does the same kind of thing. And certainly there are lots of examples of using pins in holy wells. And there, of course, you have the crossover with the idea of it as an offering.
Yes.
So, but you would drop a pin into a well, and how it fell, the direction that it pointed when it landed in the bottom of the well, could be used to divine, whether the person you were in love with was going to marry you or not, for instance.
Yes. There's a lot of things about, loved ones and love. I have a friend that she said, and she's basically an hereditary witch, and she said, my grandmother always told me that, humanity and man and women always will rely on very simple things. And, one of them is like food, love, money, or work, and health. So those things are always present in magic, because those are the things that people actually seek for, all through the ages. I mean, it's not really 16th century or 17th century. It's all over, and still today we we do that, So it's very natural to actually find out on the 17th century mentions of actually, pins for love, and to discover who you're going to marry, and all of that. And it's very interesting. Now there is a contra magic also, that it's performed with pins, and this is a very interesting one. It's the dog's heart. Can you talk to us about the dog's heart? It's very interesting.
Yes. That's when you, if you think that animals have been bewitched, if one of your animals dies and you suspect that it's witchcraft, then to protect the other animals, you would take out the heart of the animal that had died and stick pins in it. And that was based on the idea that when someone performed witchcraft and put a curse on someone or a person or an animal, they created a magical link between them, which you could then use to turn the curse back onto the witch. So the idea was that by sticking pins in the heart of the dead animal, you would injure the witch and force that person then to break the curse and so break the connection.
Yes.
So that you could no longer turn the curse back on the witch.
Yes. Yeah. Now, one of the things now that we're talking about dogs, one of the very interesting things about dogs, and particularly this story, is the black dog, which takes us to the familiar spirits. What happened? What happened to Alizon and the black dog?
Well, actually, in order to explain that, we have to go back a little bit before the 1612 Pendle case.
Yes.
Because Roger Nowell, who was the local magistrate who prosecuted the Pendle suspects, 15 years earlier, he had been involved in another witchcraft case, and that had involved his nephew, Nicholas Starkey. And he had employed a cunning man called Edmund Hartley to cure his children when they were ill. And part of the cure involved Edmund and Nicholas performing a circle ritual. And that also really interested me, because we're talking about not a sort of elaborate ceremonial magician-type circle ritual, but a fairly simple, basic circle ritual performed by a cunning man as part of a healing process. But, of course, the circles kind of do imply making contact with the other world. You're creating a magical space that is sort of between this world and the other world. And unfortunately, Nicholas Starkey, Roger Nowell's nephew, the employer of the cunning man, got a bit spooked. And he became convinced that Edmund Hartley, the cunning man, had summoned evil spirits, and that his family were now haunted by these spirits. And the chief of these spirits took the form of a black dog. And of course, there's lots and lots of black dog legends. I believe you have them in the States.
Yes,
you have a trucker legend, don't you?
Yes, we do.
Of truckers being leapt at by black dogs.
Yes.
And we have lots of black dog legends in this country. And I think essentially they're fairy, they're fairy animals.
Yes,
they're elves or fairies who sort of take the shape of black dog.
Yes.
But of course, as part of all this sort of demonization of magic and demonization of spirit beings and fairies, they, to a lot of people, they were very much associated with the devil. And in fact, in the museum, we've got a really rather beautiful little 19th century French bowl, which has got a really charming picture. It shows the devil with horns, holding a candle to indicate that he's Lucifer. And he seems to be going for a walk with his dog, because he's got this really lovely black dog trotting along in front of him. But anyway, to get back to Alizon, then 15 years later, Alizon is accused of bewitching this peddler, and she's arrested by Roger Nowell, and of course all the sort of horrible things that happen to people when they're arrested for witchcraft: stripped naked to look for witch marks, put under a lot of pressure to implicate other people. Sort of. She tried to do a deal with Roger Nowell by incriminating this rival family of cunning folk. And also Roger Nowell managed to trick her brother James into saying some incriminating things about her. And so you have to remember that actually Roger Nowell was a very experienced interrogator. He was about 60 years old, and he'd also been sheriff of Lancaster. So he was not just he wasn't new to this. Yeah. And also he had studied a lot of witch hunters' manuals, which told you how to interrogate people. And basically, I think it's definitely true that people who practiced magic in the early modern period did believe that they had spirit helpers, protecting spirits. In fact, Heinrich Cornelius Agrippa, in his book, 3 Books of Occult Philosophy, which was a very influential 16th century book of magic, actually says everybody has a familiar spirit. He says a threefold good demon who protects you. Yes. And so I think it's very likely that Alizon believed that she had a familiar spirit. But basically, Roger Nowell provoked her into admitting that she had a familiar spirit, and she described this spirit as a black dog. And it's very tempting to think that she was actually doing that because she knew that Roger Nowell and his family had been haunted by this black dog, who was supposedly the spirit raised by this other cunning man, Edmund Hartley. Yes. I think that she was, because she was a teenager, and she was feeling very vulnerable, and she wanted to say to Roger Nowell, "Look, I'm not this helpless teenage girl, who is at the mercy of you just because you're this important magistrate. Yes. I am a person who has magical power, and that includes having a spirit who will protect me." And I think that she just chose the shape that she thought would shock Roger Nowell. Yeah. That because his family had already had encounters with this sinister black dog from this earlier case, she actually wanted to frighten him. Yeah. She wanted to turn the tables. She had been humiliated and scared by him, and she wanted to give him a fright. Yeah. And I think it was just a very reckless teenage response. Yeah. Yeah. But certainly, animal spirits, the black dog was a particularly sinister type of spirit because it was already by that time associated with the devil, and because of all the black dog legends, which go back probably way into pre-Christian times. But certainly people did believe in animal spirits. Oh, yeah. And because people lived more closely with animals, and I don't think they had this idea that we are so fixated on the idea of how rational human beings are, and because animals are supposed not to have this capability of reason that humans have. We do tend to look down on them now, but in the past, people understood that animals have skills. Dogs have these, and cats. Their senses are so much more acute than ours, and people had a much more reverential attitude to other species. So, and actually, this is something that has been discussed by another writer, Emma Wilby. She's written a couple of books about familiar spirits. Yes. And she takes this line that actually people had much more respect for animals, and so it wasn't surprising for them to envisage that spirits might take animal form. And she compares this with some Native American shamanic traditions where, people have spirit helpers, particular type of spirit helpers, depending upon the kind of ritual that they're doing. But, for instance, if you had, you wanted to perform a ritual where you wanted the spirit to be particularly agile, you might choose a mouse, for instance, because mice are really agile.
Yes.
So there was definitely something of that in it as well.
Now, you talk about charms and amulets also, a lot of charms and amulets on the book. And, the famous Sator, amulet and square, the Sator square, which, people, talk about a lot. And other objects of magic, like, for instance, I'm looking to the pictures, which are absolutely amazing. And by the way, the black dog with the devil in the pot is on the book, so it's a picture that it's on the book. You talk about the bees, for instance, the little tree, the tree bees on the little bag for prosperity, and then you talk about other things. Now, if we look into these amulets and some of the ancient things that even in the Museum of Witchcraft we can see that clearly. There's a lot of the use of the sacred name of God, Angla, which is Agla, and in some of these, amulets and magical items and things like that. And it's very interesting because this is, do you think that, when we think about witchcraft and when we think about witches and, when we think about cunning men and cunning women, we think about pagans, and it's not really accurate, is it? Because then we can find these kind of like things. And we actually see on your book, there's this mention, I can't really recall what it was, but it's someone that says, what is this, healing, or what is this witchcraft? It was, and someone says that it was a gift that God gave to me. So it's kind of like, you know what I mean? What was that? I don't remember what it was. Do you remember what it was? It was a passage where someone said... Yeah, go ahead.
Yes, it was actually from George Gifford. He wrote a fictional dialogue. He was actually opposed to magic,
yes.
But he wrote this dialogue in which fictional characters discuss magic, and one of the characters is somebody who has been to a wise woman, and yes, he says, who do you think gave this power to the wise woman? And she says, I think it is a gift that God has given her. I think it is from the Holy Spirit.
Yes, the Holy Spirit, yes.
And actually the idea, I think, again, what surprised me was how much Christian imagery there was in particularly the spoken charms. So that James Device recites their healing charm to Roger Noel, and it's full of references to the crucifixion and the Last Supper, and it actually describes Jesus Christ at the Last Supper holding a healing wand.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that was not really conventional Christianity. In many ways, it was sort of quite a pagan type of Christianity, because essentially it was seeing Jesus as being this connection between the human and the divine, and so as a way of accessing divine power. So it does go back, and this is where the reference to the Holy Spirit, I think, is quite interesting, because again, in Heinrich Cornelius Agrippa, in the 3 books of occult philosophy, says that everything that is used in magic, whether it's herbs or charms, or whether you are calling on a spirit for help, it is all ways that God allows us to access his power. And so, again, there is this idea, which does go certainly back to ancient Egypt and probably way, way back before then, that actually, the divine power that created the universe is still constantly recreating it. And so, there is this divine energy permeating the material universe. And in a way, you can see Jesus as a symbol of that. You know, the fact that he is divine and yet also human. And so, in a funny sort of way, Christianity was quite a good religion for people who were practicing magic. And I don't think it's any coincidence that, you know, the Middle Ages and the early modern period, when Christianity was supreme in Europe, and, you know, almost everybody would have called themselves a Christian, was also a time when there was so much magic going on. Because, in a way, the idea of Jesus as this connection between the material and the divine world sort of reinforced the idea that magic could also make this connection between the normal and the divine.
No, I do. There is this. It's very interesting that we discovered this, you know, and that you researched so deeply this particular, you know, time. Because I said this before, and I continue to say it, there are still people practicing this way, you know, using those, you know, spells and those with Christian, you know, with Christian imagery, with, you know, there are still cunning men and cunning women. They would not call themselves witches, because that's a completely different ballgame. But they will call them, you know, there are the cunning men and cunning women. Because I am originally from Portugal, and I remember when I was there that there were a lot of, if you have a problem with a loved one, if you had a problem with, you know, a disease, if you have a problem with whatever, you will go to see the woman. And the woman would be this woman that actually will perform, you know, and give you herbs and will give you, you know, tea. It's still today. I mean, this is in practice today. And candles and a spell for you to do, and a prayer for you to do, you know, every, you know, whatever moon it was. And, you know, from 3 days in 3 days, or, you know, with a knife over, you know, olive oil and do the cross. And then you just say this and that. And so this is still going on. And it's absolutely amazing. Now, one of the things that I find it very interesting is that there is no written... Is there any written record of this other than the witch trials? Is there any books that we can, you know, go to and say, oh, this is, you know, that those cunning men and cunning women? You know, I often say no, because they were not, you know, they were simple people. They were not literate at all. They knew the herbs, and they knew the spells, and they knew the things, you know, by you know, they memorized them, and that was it. And they would pass it on this way. And sometimes the pass it on of the spell has some kind of a procedure to it. For instance, I remember that there is this evil eye spell that you do over olive oil in Portugal, and you're not supposed to write it down. If you want it to work for you, you're supposed to listen to it oftentimes, so that you will memorize it in the act, so that, and then you can reproduce it. So it's kind of like you listen to it over and over again. If you write it down, it will lose its power. So it's very interesting, and this is, you know, popular, you know, like just, you know, in the countryside, you know, in little villages and stuff.
Yeah.
And still today. So it's very interesting. What is your explanation? I mean, of not having those books, those you know, the books of shadows, as people say. You know, what do you think?
Well, surprisingly, I mean, you're absolutely right. That, I mean, here in Cornwall too, there are family traditions where people pass on charms, and you know, and they make very certain that nobody hears what the charm is, and it's kept very secret. And you know, it has to be passed down. Sometimes it has to be passed from a man to a woman, and a woman to a man in the same family. Yeah. But also, you do get lots of records. I mean, some of the, for instance, the charm that James Device recited to Roger Nowell, parts of that are very similar to charms that occur in medieval medical manuscripts. So they were being used by conventional physicians,
Yes.
quite moving in quite wealthy circles. Even royal physicians were using the same charms, and they were writing them down in their books so they could pass them on to, to people who were learning from books. So there was a surprising amount of overlap between the kind of what we might regard as the sort of learned magicians who wrote books and read books, and the cunning folk who worked in a more oral tradition. And also, cunning folk did start to write and read books as literacy increased. So that there are references. There's an interesting reference to a 16th-century wise woman who had a book of love spells, and there's in fact in the Pendle witchcraft case there's a reference to a school teacher in Cone who protected somebody against a curse by his learning, which implies that he had some kind of book of magic, because he had learnt through being a scholar.
Yeah.
And in fact, in the Museum of Witchcraft, we've got a copy of a late 16th, early 17th century manuscript that originally belonged to the Plymouth artist Robert Lenkovich, which is a sort of halfway point between a sort of magician's book of magic and a wise woman or cunning man's book of magic, because it's got lots of talismans and stuff in it's like a sort of book of ceremonial magic, but it's also got a love spell that involves a bone from a toad and herbal remedies, and again some of these little Christian charms of the kind that we know that the Pendle cunning folk use.
Yeah.
So although yes, you're right that you have the two extremes, the ceremonial magic which is done from grimoires, and the family charm, which nobody must know who isn't a member of the family. But there's also a massive area, sort of grey area between the two, where you have a sort of certain degree of overlap, and the same charms can crop up in the various different traditions.
Mm-hmm. Now, it's very interesting. Again, another thing that it's huge. It's scrying. Scrying is one of the things that it's absolutely, and people are doing this for for so long, and it's just amazing. Sometimes in water, sometimes in and you give an example here. It's a modern obsidian, scrying mirror, similar of the John Stee's one and Edward Kelly. What do you have any evidence of these procedures that you found in and it's always an obsidian, or it's always water, or what did you find about scrying?
In fact, mainly mirrors in the early modern period. One of the things that cunning folk did was identify witches. I mean, it's interesting how, in some respects, cunning folk could be argued to have been witch hunters. They did benefit in some respects from the fear of witchcraft, because as people became more afraid of witchcraft and more likely to blame illness and misfortune on having been cursed by someone, then obviously they were more likely to go to a cunning man or cunning woman to have counter magic. But I think really it wasn't so much that, some people have argued that cunning folk actually helped to increase the fear of witchcraft, but I think actually they were just responding to, what their clients, if a client came to you and said, I think I've been bewitched, then, you are probably not very likely to argue with them. And one of the things that they did was to identify who the witch might be, usually by looking into a mirror. And in fact, there is in another witch trial record, there's a very detailed description of how, in fact, in that case, the cunning man got the father of the supposedly bewitched girl to look into the mirror himself, and he saw the face of the woman who, in fact, he already suspected. But anyway, that confirmed his idea that this was the witch, and then the cunning man prescribed a spell to cure the girl. But but there are also references to people using crystal balls, and lots of references to people using, well, stones of crystal. And John Aubrey, writing in the late 17th century, who was just a person who was curious about magic. He didn't practice magic, but he wasn't against it either, and he collected a lot of interesting stories about magic. And he describes this little crystal ball, which was actually only about an inch across, so essentially the same as a modern crystal ball, but much smaller. And in the Robert Lenkiewicz manuscript that we've got in the museum, there's a long invocation for invoking the help of a spirit to see things in a crystal ball. So mirrors and crystal balls were what mainly we have records of. That's not to say that people didn't use other things like bowls of water as well, but the records mainly talk about mirrors and crystal balls.
That's amazing. Very nice. Now, let's talk about my favorite subject. Not because it's, just because I just love it. I really think that it's very interesting. Curses. And this is something that, we find in the Museum of Witchcraft. There is just this display of of curses and spells that were done for cursing and pins and all of that. But for curses, the methods and all of that it's very interesting. What do you think? I mean, you have a little bit here about the psychology of curses and the methods. I would like you to talk to us about that, because it's very interesting.
Yes, certainly. I mean, that you can't get away from the fact that people did sometimes try to use magic to harm people.
Yes.
But usually it was a sort of retaliation, and there is actually kind of quite a grey area, really, between protection magic and curses.
Yes.
And in fact, the Pendle case offers quite a good example of that, because the other two wise women, the rivals, Anne Whittle and Anne Redfern, they were accused of putting a curse on their landlord's son after he had sexually harassed Anne Redfern. And you get this over and over again in the history of curses, that a curse could only really work if the person who you were cursing had already done something to injure you.
Yes.
And often, curses were not intended to kill people. In fact, in the vast majority of cases, there's some fascinating description of how to perform a curse in a book called the Liber de Angelis, and that's specifically at the end of telling you how to do the curse. It tells you how to undo it when you've decided that you don't want to punish the person anymore. So I think that's really quite an important aspect of it. And also, curses, for instance, in the museum, we have one which is this really very creepy-looking object. It's a cloth face with a needle driven through the tongue.
It's really creepy.
But actually, that was to stop someone spreading malicious gossip.
Yes,
So, it certainly wasn't intended to kill the person.
No, but curses in itself, I mean, the curse, I mean, if you're cursed, you are... I think it's, death would be too good, I think. So it's kind of a slow kind of torment, I think, or a stopping.
You want the person to be sorry for what they have done to you.
Exactly.
It's rather up to you where you draw the line. Exactly. At what point you think they've suffered enough.
Exactly. But one of the things that it's very interesting, and I find it this in, in Italian witchcraft and also in Iberian witchcraft, it's the use of, which, some people find it disgusting, the usage of real tongue. I mean, either being, a cow's tongue or something, some, pork's tongue or whatever, and then stick the pins into the tongue, which is very interesting. So it's not as, fancy as this little box with a little head in it.
Well, and I think I mean, that's another important point about magic, is that there was a lot of improvisation involved. And as you made the point earlier, it was very much about solving people's eternal problems, love, money, bad luck, illness. And it was primarily very practical. Yes, it had this profound spiritual belief system underlying it, which gave it its sort of underlying power. But it was very much a matter of using what was to hand, like pins and animal parts. I mean, again, we're talking about farming communities. Today it would be quite difficult to get hold of a cow's tongue. But of course, if you were killing your own animals to eat them, you had these bits of animal about you, as it were. If you wanted to have, your steak for dinner, then you would end up with the tongue of the animal as well at some point. So,
exactly. Why not use it, right? It's exactly that. One of the most amazing findings, I think, that I have here, it's just amazing. And I think that I don't know if it is in the Museum of Witchcraft, if you have this. It's actually from recent time. I mean, it's for 1940s. And it's an office, it's a file, it was found in the filing cabinet of an office in Cornwall. And it's a photograph pierced with pins in the drawer of the cabinet. That's very ingenious, isn't it? It's very nice, very nice example.
Such a good example of how you're using a photograph in the same way that before somebody would have used a clay or a wax image. You're bringing up to date. You're working on the same basic principles, but you're using what you have to hand and what the sort of modern equivalent. So magic can evolve, and yet at the same time use the same basic principles that go back hundreds of or even thousands of years, and that again is one of the things that's really fascinating about it.
Absolutely. And I mean, the evolution of this is absolutely amazing, and it's very interesting. Now, another thing is the mandrake, shaped images, and there is the whole folklore about the mandrake, being it's very interesting also. Can you tell us a little bit more about the mandrake, which is the mandrake roots, and again, you see that in Harry Potter, which is absolutely amazing. So tell us a little bit more about the mandrake, because it's fascinating.
Well, of course, it's a fascinating plant because it is a very powerful drug. Again, you can trace its use right back to ancient Egypt, where it was sacred to the goddess Hathor, and they used to make this drink out of blood, beer, and mandrake that they drank as her rituals. And then it was, in the Middle Ages, it was used as an anaesthetic, and it is also a powerful hallucinogen, so it crops up, again, in Heinrich Cornelius Agrippa in some of the incenses that he recommends for rituals. So you can imagine that if you were trying to induce some kind of vision of a spirit, inhaling burning mandrake root might well be quite helpful. And then, of course, there is accounts in Shakespeare of mandrake roots being carried as good luck charms. Yes. And these were often human shaped. And they were thought to grow under a gallows and take on the shape of the human form of the prisoners and the life force. Their magical power came from the life force of the executed prisoners. But interestingly, we have some carved mandrakes. They're actually on loan to the museum from a collection from the Netherlands. And what probably people actually did was, it was very skillful. They would actually carve the root and tie it with twine and then rebury it to get it to grow into the shape of a human being. And some of these mandrakes in the Richel collection from the Netherlands actually come with little coffins, and the coffins have sigils inside. So there's something kind of quite almost sort of Osirian about the
Isn't
idea
it?
of,
I thought that,
these little mandrakes in their little coffins.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. I think it's, I don't know, I'm not sure about what I'm going to say right now, but I think that it's in Mastering Witchcraft, from Paul Husson, that he gives a recipe on how to do this and how to bury it, and then, and carving it and then burying it again, and then, and digging it out again, and it's just a whole process, and it's very interesting. Now, another thing that it's over and over again that we find out throughout history, and I'm sure in the 17th century also, it's the use of toads and toad lore. It's just something that it's very, I think embroidered into, English folklore and witchcraft practices. What is about this toad that you found out that it's so appealing and so magical?
Well, in the North Berwick witchcraft case that I mentioned earlier, which was so influential on King James I when he wrote his book Demonology, the wise woman Agnes Sampson actually collected venom from toads. And again, this was supposed to be so that she could kill the king, but other books of magic talk about using that in healing magic. And of course, that is, again, a hallucinogen. So there is that connection. But there's also this, but with both frogs and toads, there is this long tradition of the magical bone, which in the Robert Lenkovich manuscript is used for love magic, but also could give you, it was one of the things that the sort of horseman's word tradition for getting power over horses, and also a way to actually gain magical power was if you acquired one of these bones, and you had to get the frog or the toad and kill him, poor thing, and then bury the body in an anthill until all the bones were picked clean, and then put the skeleton in water, and one of the bones would float against the stream, and that was the magic bone that you could then use for love magic or to have magical power or power over horses, and that's a very ancient tradition.
It's fascinating. You do have an example here on the book of a dead toad hanging from a holder on a chimney in Devon. And this is from the 1930s, but I do know that there is, a lot of lore about the toads that, way back. I mean, it's not really from now, certainly not from 1930s.
But it's very interesting how these things were certainly still being done well into the 20th century. So, and interestingly, we've just been given some information about some charms in Scarborough Museum, and they've got a couple of toads, again from Devonshire, which were hung up in little bags in houses to protect against witchcraft.
That's very interesting.
And again, that's the sort of late 19th, early 20th century. And one of them, the bag is obviously some kind of curtain fabric, because it's this really pretty bag with this pattern of leaves on it that contained this dead toad that was hung up in the house to protect against witchcraft.
Poor thing. Now, poor toad. Now, one of the things that it's a question here on the chat room is why would they use pins opposed to nails, for instance? Would it be, what is the difference? Is there any difference, or did you see on your research anything like, nails being used instead of pins?
People did sometimes use nails. Certainly because there's another interesting form of counter magic against witchcraft called the witch bottle, which involved if you thought that you had been bewitched. You may have seen pictures of them. They're sort of, they often use these Bellarmine bottles, these lovely stoneware bottles with a face on the front.
Yes.
And you would put the victim's urine and salt and either pins or nails in the bottle. And again, the idea was that would then turn the curse back on to the witch. But in terms of image magic, it is occasionally you get needles mentioned, but it is almost always seems to be pins.
Now,
and I don't.
how difficult was this for them to get? I mean, this is something that was difficult to get, right? The pins.
Yes, I mean certainly, if you were a person in a rural area, as I mentioned earlier, people were often not paid with money; they were paid with farm produce. So, people didn't really have much money, and to actually go, this is, one of the slightly surprising things, which I think does show that Alizon wanted the pins for magic. That she would have had to have saved up what little money she had for some time to be able to afford to buy actual pins.
I'm thinking I would be upset also if I've saved my money for years, not for years, but for some months, and then the man didn't give me the pins. I would curse him and cause him a heart attack right there.
Well, quite. Yes, absolutely.
Yes.
And I think, I just really, I do identify with Alizon. I think she's a wonderful, and again, what is so extraordinary about this case is that you can identify with these people. You really can understand what was going through their minds. But yes, I think I don't quite know exactly why pins were used rather than nails, unless it's something to do with the fact that they were a bit special. I mean, nails obviously people would have around the place, and perhaps it was the idea of going to a little bit of trouble to get something that was a little bit unusual.
Yes.
I mean, nails were also magical. Horseshoe nails, quite interestingly, we know today about how horseshoes are considered to be lucky, but there are quite a lot of references to people using horseshoe nails, again, actually, from this collection of charms in Scarborough Museum. There's a rather lovely one of a ring made out of a horseshoe nail that I think was used to protect against illness, or no, it was just a good luck. It was just a good luck charm.
Good luck charm, yes.
So nails had their own special side of magic. People did use nails for magic, but when it came to image magic, for love magic or for cursing people, pins seemed to have the edge.
Yes. It was the preferred weapon. Now, how can what did you find out about this the use of pins in healing, which is very interesting, because people sometimes and I think that it has to do again with what you said. It's directing energy, so you would pierce the part of the body of the person, or of the puppet, or whatever you used to to actually relief, or and there's this other thing that I found out, which is very interesting. Sometimes they pierce, and especially in healing, they pierce the thing, either being a photograph or even an image, a wax image, or a puppet made of fabric or whatever, to relieve the pain, to relieve or to take out, because apparently it functions as an antenna or an escape of that particular
yes.
You know what I mean?
Yes. And that was a common wart cure too, was to prick the wart with a pin and then put the pin in a holy well, something like that. Yes.
Yeah.
So and in that case, it's as if the pin is actually absorbing the illness.
Another thing that I find out, which is very interesting and very much cunning, from cunning folk, it's the rubbing of an egg into the inflicted person or area, and and sometimes animals were rubbed in also, so that they would transfer the disease to the animal, which is horrible. I know.
Yes.
It sounds horrible, but,
yes.
but it's it was what it was done. I mean, either the egg or an animal, and then the animal would be with the disease, so it will transfer the disease to the animal. Did you find this out on your researches also?
Yes, there are accounts from witch trials, particularly in Scotland. There's one where the cunning man passed the patient through a loop of wool, quite a big loop of wool, we assume, and then passed a cat through the loop of wool. And the idea was that then the illness would be transferred to the cat.
Yes.
But we also, in the museum, we have these wonderful things called get lost boxes, which were still being used in Cornwall in the 1960s.
Oh.
And the idea being that you put something that was symbolic, not just of an illness. It might be, it could be, you could, put in a pebble that you touch to your wart or something in this box. But also it could be to get rid of a misfortune. And Cecil actually, in one of his captions, says that one of these boxes contained an unwanted husband's tobacco pouch. So you put the thing in a box, which you wrapped up enticingly, and you left it in the street in the hope that somebody would pick it up.
And leave it.
And then whatever it was would be transferred to the person whose curiosity had rashly got the better of them.
That's very interesting, because I heard that, but I heard it differently. I heard it that you posted to a different location with no return address. So that might be, I think, a modern intake onto this lost. What is it called? The box.
Get lost box.
Lost box. I think that you just mail it to some place with no return address, so he will go and stay in the post office forever. But at least it's sympathetic magic, isn't it? I mean, it's just to get that out of here. So it's
and it's not unlike throwing something onto a fire. And in fact, we had some visitors to the museum who said that I think they were from Switzerland, and they still cure illness by putting a piece of paper in the mouth of the sick person. Then they put the piece of paper in a box, and then they put the box in the fire. And of course, the idea of throwing something onto a fire to get rid of an illness, that crops up way back in trial records. You would make a mixture of herbs and pig's dung or something, and then throw that onto the fire, or throwing salt onto a fire, as a way of getting rid of an illness.
Yeah, it's very interesting. That the salt is another thing that it's absolutely interesting that was used. And I think I don't know. Was it rare in the 17th? I think it was rare in the 17th century. What was a meaning of conserving meat? I know that they salted everything. And
I suppose, and that of course gave it a sort of magical property in itself, didn't it? Because it had this way of preserving things that otherwise, which of course was very important when you didn't have refrigerators. But again, yes, it would have been something that was valuable. Something a bit special, even though it was something, something that you used for other purposes.
No, absolutely. And the other thing is that salt preserved and also it would prevent disease, which is very interesting, because if things were preserved, they would not kill you or make you sick. Therefore, salt could be used in cleansing or preserving things or curing things or washing things, and getting rid of stuff. So it's very interesting, the connections that there are between things and how things really relate. Taking into account, go ahead.
A lot of it is almost like a kind of poetic imagery. The bees charm that you were talking about before. Bees being associated with honey and industry, and flitting from flower to flower, collecting pollen. Become this rather beautiful poetic image of prosperity.
I'm just so grateful to you right now, because sometimes I can't really explain to people, why am I so fascinated by cursing, and curses in general? Because I think that the poetic imagery, here we go, and this is your your expression of curses, it's so intense and so interesting, that makes it, to me, makes it very interesting to look at, and it's interesting to look at. It's not because I just love to do harm to people. It's absolutely nothing to do with that, but it's just the poetic imagery of it.
But if you are really angry with somebody, is it, which is worse? I mean, there are a number of things you can do. You can let it fester and destroy you, eat you up inside.
Yes.
Or you can go and beat the person up with a stick. Or you can make an image of them. And actually, I'm not sure that making an image of them isn't the best of the three, really.
I know. But at least you can, I mean, I don't know. I just, it's very, very interesting, these things that people you have to, do you ever, and this is one of the things that I want to ask you. There is this very, and I think this is a 50s, 1950s, this idea of the threefold law, and how you can't really do harm to others, it comes back to you threefold, blah blah. Did you ever encounter on your researches, either in the witch trial records or anywhere else, anything about this or anything similar to the threefold law?
No, not really. On the other hand, there is a reference in one of the trial records to the idea that if you had healing powers, and then you used your magic to harm somebody, you would lose your healing power.
Yes.
And also, I think it's quite significant that James' device, in one of the most moving parts of the pamphlet, right at the end, when he was in prison, in Lancaster prison, and had probably been quite badly tortured by that point, he describes how the black dog offers him the power to take revenge on his enemies, and he refuses it. And when you think what had happened to him, his family had been arrested, by that stage his grandmother had died in prison. It was very likely that he and his sister and his mother were all going to be executed, and he himself had almost certainly been really badly tortured. And yet he chooses not to have the power of revenge.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And I think that really, ultimately, because magic is about the way everything is connected, really what it's, in its sort of best sense, it is about making us understand. It's about wisdom, isn't it? Really, and it's we can all understand a person who that their boyfriend has gone off with somebody else, and the idea of sticking pins in an image of them, it's very tempting. But at the end of the day, really, it's not very wise, is it? It's giving way to emotion,
Yes.
And it would be much better to think, well, maybe this has happened for a reason. Maybe I should be focusing on the future, not letting this grievance get the better of me. Maybe in the bigger picture, this is all supposed to happen. And I think that, so I think really, I think that curses were a way that people dealt with injustice and in the past, of course, again, we have to remember that people didn't have solicitors and police forces, and it was a very unjust society. And the cunning woman or cunning man's power to put a curse on somebody was often quite an important break that stopped people abusing their power, because they were afraid of the possibility that the wise woman or cunning man was this figure in the community who could right injustices by putting curses on people.
Yeah.
That was I think that was, it was a way that people could protect themselves and defend themselves. But ultimately, magic is a positive thing. It's about healing and well-being.
Mm-hmm.
It is essentially, it's a creative force.
Mm-hmm.
And the universe is, life exists because there is some imperative, whatever you like to call it. There is a life imperative. There is something that makes our world full of life. And therefore, magic is primarily about healing and good fortune and making people better and happier and healthier.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so, tempting though it is sometimes to think that it would be nice to use it for revenge, that's not really what magic is about.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, no. And it's very interesting. It's very interesting that you come up with that, because that was a trick question. To see what you have to say about that. And you came out of it very, very nicely. No, it is. And it's always about life, isn't it? And it's always about creating, not destroying. But, sometimes, and I'm sure that they did this, they did curse, but they didn't curse it lightly. Either if it was because they abused their daughter, or they stolen their cow, or they, there was a strong reason behind any cursing or any type of, and people sometimes did curse, just publicly. They would say, you will, da 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 da, just because, and I'm sure if I was Alison, I would have to do that to the man that refused the pens. And I'm, it's when I looked at this story and the way you described it and how it's described, I do think that he had a heart attack, or some sort of heart issue, because it's the way it's described. It seems like that for some reason. I don't know what it is, but nobody would just fall. Just out of terror, or out of, don't curse me please, or whatever. I mean, either, as you say, either he tripped to, in the field, which is likely also because there is a lot of things to trip on, or it was a heart attack, because then you say that he was in the inn and then he was ill, and he was, so it might be that. We never know. Yeah. But it's very interesting. What is your intake? What did you think that he felt? Was it because she cursed him? No. It might be. I don't know. What do you think?
I think that it's the fact that he believed that she cursed him is, in a twisted kind of way, a tribute to the fact that she was a powerful figure in her community. She was a member of a family of people who were known to have magical power.
Yeah.
And you see, one of the things that strikes me as being interesting about this case is that her grandmother, Elizabeth Southerns, was widely recognised as being a very powerful person, and there's an account of somebody going to her to get her to cure a sick cow and that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. But Roger Nowell, the magistrate, even though he was hostile towards magic, he hadn't done anything about Elizabeth Southern. She was nearly 80 years old, and for all this time, she and Roger Nowell, the magistrate, had coexisted. It was only when the two teenagers, James and Alizon, appeared on the scene and was just starting to practice magic, that Roger Nowell suddenly felt that he had to do something about the family. And so my gut feeling is that James and Alizon were felt by the community to be particularly powerful. Yeah. And also they were teenagers, and they flew off in rages, and they were unpredictable in the way that teenagers were.
Yeah.
And suddenly there were these magically powerful, stroppy teenagers in the community, and people were worried about what they were going to do.
Of course. If I mean, it's very interesting because, a teenage at that time, at that point, would be equivalent to what age today? I mean, obviously it would be, I mean, socially. It was not certainly the teenage of today. I mean, they were very mature at the time, or they're supposed to be mature. I mean, a little bit
Well,
more.
I don't know, they, I mean,
Probably
yes,
not.
I suppose well, I mean, they certainly grew up quicker insofar as they were expected to, work on the farm from, the age of 6, pretty much.
Yeah.
And I suppose, they didn't have, we have a culture of teenagers, and we have special, we gear clothes and music and TV programs to them. But on the other hand, the kind of pressures, wondering about who you're going to get married to, does the boy you fancy you, and and there's sort of sibling rivalry. There's sort of little hints that James and Alizon, there was a certain amount of tension between them, and again, the fact that they were starting out on their magical careers, and they were going to have to start thinking about, can we get people to actually employ us to practice magic? So all that sort of, worry about how your life is going to take shape. I don't think those things change. Those are pretty much timeless, really.
Yeah, I know. So, this is an amazing book. I think that this is the best book I ever read in the past, I think 6 years or 7 years. So it's really a pleasure.
Well, thank you very much.
It really is a pleasure to
very
be
gratified.
Absolutely, it's really a pleasure to me to be here talking with you, which is you are now one of my favorite authors. So it's.
Oh, thank you very much indeed.
And I really wanted to go to the Museum of Witchcraft, and we have a promised trip to England, and obviously we're going to Cornwall, and we will visit. Do you work there every day? I mean, probably not, but.
Not every single day, but most days.
Okay. Okay.
And if I know you're coming, I will be sure to be there.
Okay. So we will communicate, and it would be wonderful.
Would be great.
No, it would be wonderful to do a show, not a show directly, but to do a tour on the museum and actually talk to you and to Graham and to all of the people in the museum and do a special. I think that would be great.
Wonderful.
Yeah, and video. That would be great. So, thank you so much, Joyce, for being here and for really, really granted us with these pearls of knowledge, and to be so.
Well, thank you.
Oh, thank you so much for being here.
It's been my pleasure.
Thank you. Don't go anywhere, because I'm going to just close the show, and then I'm going to talk to you a little bit more, okay?
Okay. Thank you.
So that's it. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here on Witch Talk. This was the last minutes of this fantastic show with Joyce, and the book that she has, Wicked Enchantments, and History of the Pendle Witches and Their Magic. It's a fantastic book. You should buy it because it's absolutely amazing. It gives you a glimpse into the 17th century magic and cunning folk, and it's absolutely amazing. So go ahead and really buy it because it's really a very good addition to your library. Now, thank you everyone on the chat room to be here and to share this moments with us and Joyce. And next week I will be here again with more Witch Talk and another amazing guest. Until then, have a wonderful, wonderful week. Bye-bye.